The pre-dawn light had barely touched the sky when Susan Johnson arrived at the most luxurious office building in the city center. At 52, her calloused hands carried not only cleaning supplies but also the weight of single-handedly supporting her 17-year-old daughter Emily, who dreamed of attending medical school. Susan possessed a rare gift few knew about, an exceptional memory for faces, voices, and details. Since she was a child, she could recall entire conversations, phone numbers she'd heard only once, and most impressively, recognize people years after a single meeting. It was a talent she never imagined would prove useful in her life of quiet, arduous work. Every morning, Susan cleaned the 30th floor offices of the city's most prestigious event company, run by the arrogant 28-year-old Jessica Caldwell. Jessica was famous for orchestrating million-dollar weddings for the elite, but infamous for her cruel personality and utter contempt for anyone she deemed inferior. To Jessica, employees like Susan were practically invisible, beings who existed only to serve in silence. In the same building, on a higher floor, worked the renowned attorney Mr. Arthur Sterling. At 60, he had once been one of the country's most respected jurists. However, decades of wrestling with a corrupt and unjust system had left him cynical and disillusioned. He believed everyone had a price and that true integrity was a fairy tale. Wealthy and powerful, Arthur had lost faith in humanity, living isolated in a world of luxury and bitterness. Susan's routine life continued until one fateful Tuesday morning. Jessica was in the throes of planning her own wedding, a multi-million-dollar affair that had become her obsession. She had invited journalists, influencers, and the cream of high society to witness what she dubbed the wedding of the century. That day, Jessica was on edge, awaiting a visit from a luxury magazine for a special feature on the preparations. Susan was cleaning the office restroom when she heard Jessica shouting at her staff. "You are all incompetent. This wedding must be perfect. I will not tolerate mistakes." The shrill voice echoed down the hall as Susan worked on in silence. Suddenly, the restroom door flew open, and Jessica stormed in, yelling into her phone about flowers being imported from Holland. Respectfully, Susan gathered her supplies and moved toward the door to get out of the way. But just as she passed Jessica, she tripped on a vacuum cord stretched across the floor. Susan stumbled, accidentally bumping Jessica's arm just enough to make her drop her phone, cracking the screen. What followed was one of the most humiliating moments of Susan's life. Jessica erupted with a rage that was wildly disproportionate to the accident. "You wretched woman! You filthy animal! How dare you touch me!" Jessica began to scream so loudly that the entire office stopped to watch. "Just look at the kind of people they let work in this building. A dirty cleaner who can't even watch where she's going." Embarrassed, Susan tried to apologize. "I'm so sorry, ma'am, it was an accident. I can pay to have your phone repaired," but Jessica cut her off. "Pay? With what money, you miserable creature? What you make in a year, I spend in a week. People like you shouldn't even be breathing the same air as me." The public shaming dragged on, with Jessica inventing ever crueler insults. "I bet you can't even write your own name. I bet you live in some filthy shack with a horde of children. People like you exist only to clean up the messes of important people like me." Tears streamed down Susan's face, but she remained silent, thinking only of her daughter and the job she desperately needed. It was then that fate intervened. Mr. Sterling, passing down the hall on his way to a meeting, witnessed the entire scene. Ordinarily, he would have walked on without a second thought. To him, it was just another display of the world's cruel nature. But something about Susan's quiet dignity resonated with him in a way he couldn't explain. If you feel your own indignation rising at this injustice, leave a like on this video to show that you also believe every person deserves to be treated with dignity. Jessica was still in the middle of her cruel performance when Susan finally found the strength to speak. In a soft but firm voice, she said, "Ms. Caldwell, I'm sorry about your phone, but I will not apologize for who I am. I am proud of my work. I have cleaned these offices for 3 years, and I have always done my best. I support my daughter with dignity, and I am not ashamed of myself." Susan's response made Jessica even more furious. "How dare you talk back to me? I'll have you fired today. And that's not all, I will personally see to it that you never get a job in any building in this city again. I will call every one of my contacts and tell them what an insolent waste of space you are." It was then that Susan made a decision that would change the course of her life. Looking directly into Jessica's eyes, with a calmness that stunned even Mr. Sterling, she said, "You can fire me if you wish, but I will not be humiliated like this. And you should be careful with your words. Sometimes, they have a way of coming back to you when you least expect it. What would you do in Susan's place? Would you silently take the abuse to keep your job, or would you have the courage to stand up for yourself, knowing it could cost you everything? Leave your opinion in the comments. Susan's subtle warning infuriated Jessica beyond measure. That same afternoon, she made good on her threat. She not only got Susan fired but also called several cleaning companies across the city, fabricating stories about Susan being dishonest and unreliable. Within days, Susan discovered she had been effectively blacklisted. No one would hire her. But Jessica wasn't finished. Her vendetta against the cleaner who dared to defy her knew no bounds. She found out where Susan lived and used her influence to have the landlord abruptly raise the rent, making it impossible for Susan and her daughter to stay. Susan's world fell apart. Jobless and homeless, she and Emily were forced into a cramped room in a run-down boarding house in the city's poorest neighborhood. Emily, a senior in high school, had to drop out of her college prep course for medical school. There was simply no money. Her daughter's tears that night broke Susan's heart. "Mom, don't worry about me," Emily said, trying to be strong. "I can work for a while and study later. As long as we're together." But Susan felt like she was failing the most important person in her life. Every night, she questioned her decision, wondering if she should have just bowed her head and accepted the humiliation. Meanwhile, Jessica continued planning her lavish wedding, more arrogant than ever. She had turned the story of the insolent cleaner into a party anecdote, earning laughs from her high society friends for putting the help in her place. Mr. Sterling, however, couldn't get the scene out of his mind. The image of Susan, standing with such quiet dignity in the face of such ugliness, stirred something in him. It was as if she represented something he had lost long ago, the belief that integrity still existed in the world. Then, fate took a dramatic turn. A week before the wedding, Mr. Sterling was visited by an elegant middle-aged man who introduced himself as Mr. Richard Sterling, the bride's father. Richard was a powerful, old-money businessman, and he was worried about his daughter's prenuptial agreement. During their conversation, Richard casually mentioned his suspicions about Jessica's fiancé, a young entrepreneur named Edward Silver. "Mr. Sterling," Richard confided, "there's something about that boy that doesn't sit right with me, but Jessica is utterly infatuated. She's poured her entire personal fortune into this wedding, and if something were to go wrong..." Driven by professional curiosity, Mr. Sterling began to dig into Edward Silver's background. What he found was shocking. Edward wasn't who he said he was. His real name was Carlos Carl Stevens, and he had a long history of marriage fraud. He had married and swindled 3 other wealthy women, disappearing with their fortunes each time. But the most stunning discovery was that Edward always had an accomplice, the same woman, who used various disguises to help him ensnare his victims. When Mr. Sterling saw the accomplice's photo in the police files, his blood ran cold. It was a woman he'd seen several times in the building, always looking slightly different, but he recognized her now. The revelation was devastating. Jessica was about to marry a professional con man, and her own personal assistant, a woman named Patricia Hill who had earned her complete trust, was his partner in crime. They had planned it all. The $1 million wedding was the perfect cover for the biggest score of their careers. Immediately after the ceremony, they would vanish with every penny of Jessica's and her family's money. Mr. Sterling faced a moral dilemma. A part of him felt that Jessica deserved it. After all, she had destroyed Susan's life without a shred of remorse. Why should he save her? But another part of him, a part that had been dormant for years, whispered that true justice wasn't about revenge, it was about doing what was right. The situation grew even more dire when he discovered that Edward and Patricia planned not only to steal the money but also to frame Jessica for money laundering, leaving her not just broke but imprisoned. The con was perfect and irreversible. It was then that Mr. Sterling had an idea that would change everything. He remembered the cleaning lady, Susan, and her unshakable dignity. If there was one person in the world who could help him do the right thing, it was her. Mr. Sterling hired a private investigator to find Susan. When he finally located her at the boarding house, he was appalled by the conditions. The room was tiny, with water stains on the ceiling and broken furniture. Susan was visibly thinner, her eyes filled with a deep sadness. When she saw him at her door, she braced for more bad news. "Mrs. Johnson," Mr. Sterling said, his voice laced with a kindness that surprised even himself, "my name is Arthur Sterling. I witnessed what happened at Ms. Caldwell's office. I must speak with you about something of the utmost importance. Susan invited him in, embarrassed by the state of her room. I'm sorry about the mess, sir. Things have been difficult lately. Mr. Sterling sat in the only stable chair and got straight to the point. Mrs. Johnson, I've uncovered something that will change everything. Jessica is about to fall victim to a scam that will destroy her and her entire family. Susan was silent for a long moment. Finally she said, Sir, I don't understand why you're telling me this. That woman ruined my life. Why should I care what happens to her? Her question was fair, and Mr. Sterling knew it. Because, Mrs. Johnson, I believe you are the kind of person who does what is right, no matter how you've been treated. And because I have a plan that will not only save Jessica from the scam but will also bring justice for what she did to you. Mr. Sterling laid out the whole truth about Edward and Patricia, showing her the evidence. He explained their plan to steal the Caldwell fortune and frame Jessica. The wedding is in 3 days, he said. If we don't act now, it will be too late. Susan listened, her face a mask of internal conflict. But sir, what can I do? I'm just an unemployed cleaner. Who's going to believe me over people like them? That's when Mr. Sterling revealed his brilliant plan. Mrs. Johnson, in your years cleaning those offices, you must have seen and heard things. I need you to tell me everything you remember about Patricia Hill. Every detail, every overheard phone call, every person you saw her meet. And in that moment, Susan's exceptional memory became the secret weapon no one saw coming. She closed her eyes and began to recall, with stunning accuracy, every instance of Patricia's strange behavior. Whispered phone calls, hidden documents, suspicious meetings that only happened when Jessica was away. Sir, Susan said, her voice growing firm, I remember one night I was working late. Patricia thought she was alone, but I was cleaning the restroom down the hall. I heard her on the phone with someone named Carl. She said, and I quote, once the idiot signs the papers on the honeymoon, we'll have access to everything. Then we just set up plan B, and she'll never be able to talk because she'll be in jail too. A chill went down Mr. Sterling's spine. It was the confirmation he needed. Do you remember anything else? Susan continued, her memory a perfect recording. She also mentioned fake documents being prepared, and that they had an inside source at the FBI who would make the charges stick. And there's more. I remember the number she dialed that night. It was a number she used often when she thought no one was watching. The precision of her memory was extraordinary. She recalled not just conversations, but dates, times, and even what Patricia was wearing on each occasion. Mr. Sterling knew he had enough to expose the con, but he needed physical proof. He needed Susan's help one more time, in a very risky way. Mrs. Johnson, he said gravely, I have a plan, but it will require extraordinary courage. Would you be willing to go back to that office one last time? Susan looked out the window of her tiny room, thinking of her daughter's shattered dreams and the tears Emily cried over a future that seemed stolen. When she turned back to Mr. Sterling, her eyes held a resolve he had never seen before. Sir, she said, her voice steady, if there is a chance for justice, a chance to stop others from suffering what I've been through, I'll do whatever it takes. The plan was risky, but brilliant. Mr. Sterling arranged for Susan to be temporarily rehired, officially to work in another building, but in reality, to gain access to Jessica's office the night before the wedding. The idea was for Susan to use her eidetic memory and intimate knowledge of the office to find the physical evidence they needed. On the fateful night, Susan entered the building in her cleaning uniform, her heart pounding. She knew exactly where to look. At Patricia's desk, she used a small camera from Mr. Sterling to photograph documents hidden in a secret compartment she had seen Patricia use. Among them were fake contracts, offshore bank account numbers, and a detailed plan to frame Jessica. But the real danger was yet to come. Susan knew Patricia often returned late at night to make secret calls. At 11:30 p.m., just as predicted, Patricia arrived. Susan ducked into the restroom, leaving the door ajar to record the conversation. What she heard was even more chilling than she had imagined. Patricia was on the phone with Edward, finalizing the details. Tomorrow, as soon as she signs the power of attorney, you move everything to the ghost accounts, Patricia said. Our source at the FBI will launch the investigation on Monday. By the time they get back, she'll be in jail, and will be rich and long gone. What about her family? Edward asked. Will they lose everything too? Patricia laughed, a sound so cruel it made Susan shudder. Of course. Her father will be ruined when he finds out he invested everything in a company that technically belongs to his criminal daughter. It's the perfect scam, no wealthy witnesses left to cause us trouble. Susan recorded every word. When Patricia left, she waited an hour before emerging, her hands trembling. She had the evidence. The next morning, she met with Mr. Sterling. After listening to the recording, he looked at her with genuine admiration. "Mrs. Johnson," he said, "you have just saved not only Jessica but the entire Caldwell family." But he had an even bigger plan. "We will let the wedding proceed," he announced. "But they will never execute their plan. And more importantly, Jessica is about to find out who her real friends are, and who it was that truly saved her." The big day arrived. Jessica's wedding was a lavish affair at the city's grandest church. Outside, Mr. Sterling and Susan waited with a team of federal agents he had discreetly alerted. As the ceremony neared its end, he received a text. Edward had just tried to access Jessica's accounts with a forged document. The bank, already warned, had frozen everything. That was the signal. Just as the priest asked if anyone objected to the union, the church doors swung open. Federal agents walked calmly down the aisle. Edward Silver, also known as Carlos Carl Stevens, an agent announced, his voice echoing through the silent church, "You are under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and attempted money laundering." Chaos erupted. Jessica, in her wedding dress, stared in disbelief. Edward tried to run but was quickly apprehended. Then came the final shock. "Patricia Hill," the agent continued, turning to the maid of honor, "you are also under arrest for the same crimes, plus identity fraud and forgery." Jessica looked at Patricia, the person she trusted most, and saw a stranger. It was then that Mr. Sterling approached her. "Miss Caldwell," he said gently, "I know this is difficult, but there are some things you need to know about how your life was saved." He told her everything: the scam, the plan to frame her, the prison sentence she had narrowly avoided. "But sir," Jessica stammered, her voice trembling, "how did you find out? How did you get the evidence?" Mr. Sterling gestured to Susan, who stood quietly by the entrance. "Miss Caldwell, I'd like you to meet the person who saved your life and your family." When Jessica saw Susan, her face went white. She remembered the humiliation, the cruel words, the life she had destroyed out of sheer spite. "This is Mrs. Susan Johnson," Mr. Sterling said. "The cleaner you publicly shamed and whose life you ruined for no reason. It was she who, using her extraordinary memory and at great personal risk, gathered all the evidence that stopped you from becoming the victim of the biggest scam of your life." The silence in the church was absolute. Jessica looked at Susan, standing there in her simple clothes amidst the opulence, her savior. The irony was devastating. The person she had treated like trash was the only one in the world who had cared enough to save her. Congratulations for making it this far. Subscribe to the channel now, because stories like this, where justice finds the most unexpected paths, are exactly what you'll find here. Jessica's legs gave out, and she almost collapsed. Tears streamed down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. "Susan," she whispered, I don't know what to say." Susan approached with the same dignity she had shown before. "Miss Caldwell," she said softly, "I didn't do this for revenge, or for a reward. I did it because I believe everyone deserves to be protected from harm, even those who haven't been kind to us." Her words had a profound impact, not just on Jessica, but on everyone present. Mr. Sterling felt a warmth spread through his chest. This simple woman possessed a nobility of character he hadn't seen in decades. Jessica fell to her knees, right there on the marble floor, still in her $1,000,000 dress. "Susan, for God's sake, forgive me," she sobbed. "I was a monster to you. I destroyed your life out of pure malice, and you saved mine. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm begging for it." Susan knelt beside her and took her hands. "Jessica, I forgive you. And more than that, I believe you can become a better person, starting today." Mr. Sterling watched, tears welling in his own eyes. For decades, he had lost faith in human kindness. But there was Susan, who had lost everything because of Jessica's cruelty, showing a compassion that touched his very soul. In the days that followed, the story became the talk of the town. The newspapers reported the arrests and the incredible tale of the cleaner who saved the bride. Public opinion was divided. Some admired Susan's generosity, while others vilified Jessica for her cruelty. But Jessica underwent a profound transformation. She canceled the wedding and took a leave of absence from her career to reflect. The first thing she did was find Susan. "Susan," she said, standing in the cramped room at the boarding house, "I want to do more than apologize. I want to make amends for the harm I've caused you and your daughter." Jessica offered to pay for Emily's entire medical school education, including the best internships. She also offered Susan a partnership in a new service company she wanted to start, recognizing her intelligence and honesty. But Susan, with her natural wisdom, replied calmly, "Jessica, I don't want you to do this out of guilt. If you've truly changed, then let's work together as equals, and build something that helps other people." Her proposal deeply touched Jessica. Together, they developed a plan for a company that would offer decent, well-paying jobs to vulnerable people, especially women supporting their families. Mr. Sterling offered to be their lawyer, pro bono. "Ladies," he said, a smile on his face for the first time in years, "you have given me back something I thought I had lost forever, hope in human kindness." Their company became a huge success. Susan, with her attention to detail, was a natural administrator. Jessica, with her business contacts, secured major contracts. But they never wavered from their values: fair wages, full benefits, and opportunities for growth for all employees. Emily Johnson not only got into medical school but graduated at the top of her class. She always said her mother's journey from humiliation to triumph was her greatest inspiration. Inspired by Susan, Mr. Sterling returned to pro bono law, defending those wronged by the system. Mr. Richard Sterling, Jessica's father, was so impressed with his daughter's transformation that he became a major investor in their company. "Susan," he said at a meeting, "you didn't just save my daughter from a scam, you saved her soul." The story of the cleaner who saved the rich bride became a city legend. But for those who lived it, it was proof that people can change, that goodness can triumph over evil, and that the most important lessons often come from the people we least expect. 6 months after the wedding that never happened, Jessica and Susan stood before the building where it all began, now the headquarters of their new company. "I'll never be able to thank you enough, will I?" Jessica said. Susan smiled. "You already have, by becoming a better person. And that's changed not just your life, but the lives of dozens of families who now have dignified work because of us." Mr. Sterling watched them, deeply content. He had learned that true wealth isn't in money or power, but in the ability to make a difference. The company grew, opening branches in other cities, always holding to the principles of dignity and respect. Jessica became known not for her arrogance, but for her generosity. Emily graduated with honors and specialized in public health. In her graduation speech, she said, "My mother taught me that no matter how difficult our situation, we can always choose to do good and maintain our dignity." Edward and Patricia were sentenced to long prison terms. When the judge asked Susan for a victim impact statement, she simply said, "I hope they use this time to reflect and find a way to contribute positively to society when they are released." Her wisdom impressed everyone in the courtroom. Today, 5 years later, Susan is no longer a cleaner. She is the co-owner of a respected company, the proud mother of a doctor, and an example of dignity and forgiveness. Jessica is one of the city's most admired businesswomen, not for her wealth, but for her social justice work. Mr. Sterling, at 65, is a renowned advocate for workers' rights, always crediting Susan for teaching him that true justice lies not in the courts, but in the hearts of people who choose to do good. This story teaches us that true strength isn't in humiliating others, but in maintaining our dignity. It shows that forgiveness is not weakness, but an inner power that can transform even the most hardened hearts. And it reminds us that the simplest people often possess the deepest wisdom. Susan never saw herself as a hero, she just did what she felt was decent. But perhaps that humility is what made her so special. In a world that often chooses revenge, she chose compassion. She saw a chance to save a life and transform a soul. The most powerful lesson here is that we all have a choice in how we respond to injustice. We can let bitterness consume us, or we can use our experience to build something better. Susan chose the harder but more rewarding path, the path of forgiveness and transformation. What would you do in Susan's place? Could you forgive the person who destroyed your life? Would you have the courage to save the person who caused you the most pain? If this story touched your heart, leave a like, share it with your friends, and tell us in the comments what part moved you the most. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that show how good can always triumph over evil, even in the most unlikely circumstances.